Welcome to the Cyber Philosophy channel. Today we are going to talk about how holistic philosophy is applied to the most cutting-edge physics topics.
Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited for this deep dive.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So imagine for a second that you are holding a single apple in your hand, just a normal, everyday apple.
Right.
Now imagine that in order for that one apple to exist, there have to be like 19 completely invisible, ghostly apples hovering around it.
It sounds wild, I know.
It does. Like they're holding its physical form together with a mathematics we barely understand. And, if that sounds like science fiction, it's not.
No, it's actually not at all.
Right. Astrophysicists know this is the actual mathematical truth of our universe. So today, we're going to radically reshape how you view reality.
Which is a big promise, but I think we can get there.
Definitely. We are stepping away from the flat, one-dimensional perspective of the universe that you interact with every day, and we're stepping into a framework that bridges advanced mathematics, quantum mechanics, and, well, the strange, invisible anomalies of the cosmos.
Exactly.
So to help guide us through this massive philosophical engineering project, I am joined by one of the lead authors behind this groundbreaking text, and you're representing the collective voice of the researchers today. Thanks again for coming on.
Oh, it is a genuine pleasure to be here. I mean, this text has been a massive collective endeavor for us, trying to weave together these really dense threads of theoretical physics and philosophy.
Yeah, it's a lot to tackle.
It is, so we are just thrilled to dive into the deep end with you and your listeners today.
Awesome. Well, to really grasp how your philosophy applies to physics, I feel like we have to start at the bedrock.
Absolutely. The math.
Right. We need to talk about the mathematical framework your entire text is built on, which is this concept of complex space.
Yes. So in mathematics, a complex number is written as a specific equation. It's z equals x plus iy.
Okay.
And we basically use this equation to address a fundamental divide that has, haunted philosophy since the ancient Greeks.
The divide between the physical and the spiritual.
That's right.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because on one side, we have what your text calls this shore.
Yes.
This shore represents observable reality, right? The daily ethical choices you and I make, the physical stuff you can literally bump your knee into.
Exactly. And in the equation, that is represented by the real number, the x.
Okay, the x. But then on the other side, we have that shore representing the metaphysical ideal, the unobservable stuff.
The spiritual, yeah, which is represented by the imaginary number, the i.e.
Right. Now, my mind immediately goes to Plato's cave here.
Oh, sure.
Because Plato essentially argued that the physical world we see around us is just a shadow, like a mere projection of a higher, perfect reality.
Right, the world of forms.
Yeah. So are you saying the real world of X is just a shadow of the imaginary ideal?
We actually reject that projection idea entirely. I mean, completely.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We cannot view this shore as a mere shadow or like a lesser version of that shore. If you look closely at the topology of a complex number, the real part and the imaginary part do not exist in a hierarchy.
Like one isn't the master and one isn't the servant?
Precisely. They form a single, absolutely inseparable point. Think of a large sailboat.
Okay. I'm picturing a sailboat.
So the real axis, the x, is the physical boat resting on the surface of the water.
The part you can see.
Right, the part you can see, touch, the part that catches the wind. But the imaginary axis, the I, that is the heavy keel extending deep underwater.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and it is completely invisible from the surface, interacting with all those unseen currents. You cannot sail the boat without that invisible keel.
Because the boat would just capsize.
Exactly. But without the physical boat on the surface, the keel has no purpose either. It has no anchor in the physical world. So they are an organic fusion, one moving system.
That makes perfect sense. So it's not about trying to escape Plato's caves to find the real truth.
No, not at all.
The truth is actually the fusion of the shadow and the light source itself.
Yes, beautifully put.
But I want to push on how that actually works mechanically. Like, how do the real boat and the imaginary keel communicate?
Well, to understand that mechanism, we look to a concept in complex mathematics called holomorphicity.
Holomorphicity.
Yeah, specifically the Cauchy-Riemann equations. In complex math, if a function is going to be smooth and continuous, if it's going to function properly, a tiny mathematical shift on the real axis requires a perfectly synchronized, rigorous shift on the imaginary axis.
Wait, so they have to move as one?
Exactly, they move as one. And in our text, we actually translate this mathematical law into a philosophical one.
How did that work?
For us, the true unity of knowledge and action means that every single microscopic ethical action you take in the real world must perfectly resonate with your metaphysical awareness.
In the imaginary dimension?
Right.
Wait, let me make sure I'm getting this. Are you saying that if I'm at the grocery store and I make a purely selfish physical choice, like I cut someone off in line or I steal a candy bar, how does a math equation say that breaks my spiritual foundation?
Because you are decoupling the system.
Decoupling it.
Yeah. When your physical actions on the real axis fail to align with your deeper understanding of goodness or interconnectedness on the imaginary axis, you basically fail to satisfy those Cauchy-Riemann equations.
Oh, wow. So the math literally breaks down.
It literally breaks down. The system experiences a rupture, a total loss of holistic balance. You simply cannot separate the physical action from the invisible intention. They are mathematically bound.
Man, if reality and metaphysics are locked together like that, I really want to know how that shows up when we look at the physical universe.
It definitely shows up.
Let's move from pure math to what is arguably the strangest phenomenon in all of science.
Quantum entanglement.
Yes, quantum entanglement. In the text, you bring up the famous physicist John Bell, and specifically his 1981 metaphor of Bertman's socks.
Yes, a classic.
What is that metaphor trying to explain?
Well, John Bell was basically trying to explain the absurdity of quantum particles communicating across vast distances. So he used his colleague, Reinhold Bertelsmann, as an example.
Okay.
Bertelsmann famously always wore mismatched socks of different colors. So Bell pointed out that if you see Bertelsmann walk into a room and you observe that his left sock is pink, you instantly know, at faster than light speed, that his right sock is not pink.
Right, but I have to push back here. Why isn't it just predetermined hidden variables?
What do you mean?
Well, if a guy always wears mismatched socks and I see a pink one on his left foot, I instantly know the right foot isn't pink just because that information was already locked in before he even put his shoes on.
Right.
So why isn't quantum entanglement, where observing one particle instantly tells you the state of another particle light years away, just a set of predetermined variables? Like, why isn't the universe just a giant pair of predetermined socks?
What's fascinating here is that Einstein actually thought the exact same thing.
Really? Einstein?
Yes. He hated the idea of quantum randomness. He desperately wanted to believe in those predetermined hidden variables. But then Alain Aspect conducted his experiments in the 1980s.
And those actually won the Nobel Prize recently, right?
He did, yeah. Aspect proved definitively that quantum entanglement violates Bell's inequality.
Meaning what, practically?
Meaning there are no predetermined socks. The universe is not some hidden script just waiting to be read. Upon observation, the state of those entangled particles is fundamentally, genuinely random.
Wow.
They figure it out in the exact microscopic fraction of a second that you look at them. And yet they somehow manage to coordinate their states instantly across any distance.
They figure it out randomly right in the moment of observation.
Exactly.
But what is the philosophical so what of that randomness? Because if I'm a listener, randomness just sounds like chaos.
Sure.
It sounds like the universe is just rolling dice for no reason.
No, it looks like chaos if you only look at the physical world. But if we connect this to our complex space model, the boat and the keel, this randomness is profoundly meaningful.
How so?
Think about it. If everything were predetermined, if the universe were just Bertelsmann's socks, then the real world would just be a dead, rigid, fatalistic script written by the imaginary dimension.
Like a movie that's already been filmed.
Exactly. There would be no life to it. You would have absolutely no agency. Instead, this quantum randomness represents the dynamic, endless possibilities of the imaginary dimension actively empowering the real dimension.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, that randomness is the necessary gap in the system.
It's the breathing room.
Yes, it is the breathing room that allows for free will, for human awakening, and for genuine creation.
That is incredible.
And the fact that these particles communicate instantly across vast distances, what physicists call non-locality, it proves that the universe, in its unobservable imaginary dimension, is a fully interconnected, decentralized whole.
So separation is an illusion.
Pretty much. Spatial separation only exists on the flat, real surface. In the complex whole down in the deep water with the keel, everything is touching.
Okay, so entanglement proves the universe isn't following a predetermined script. But if the script isn't written yet, who writes it?
That is the big question.
Right. And that brings us to what's happening right before we look at anything. Here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, definitely.
Let's talk about quantum superposition and wave function collapse. Because superposition is the idea that before you observe a particle, it exists in all possible states at once.
Yes.
How does that map onto your philosophy?
We map quantum superposition directly to a concept we call the holozon.
The holozon.
Yeah. It means the world's full, unbroken horizon. In the imaginary space, the metaphysical realm, all possibilities, all states, all meanings coexist simultaneously without being forced into a single, rigid identity.
So the holozon is the universe in its pure, uncollapsed potential.
Exactly.
But then you or I look at it, we measure it.
Yeah.
And, if you're listening to this on your commute right now, you might be thinking, how does me looking at a stoplight change the universe?
Right, sounds absurd.
But physics tells us that observation causes the wave function collapse. The infinite possibilities vanish, and we are left with just one standard reality.
The stoplight is red.
Exactly, the stoplight is red.
Right.
Doesn't that mean that observation destroys the infinite truth of the universe?
That is the standard, somewhat pessimistic interpretation, yes. But in our philosophical engineering, we see it as a creative act.
A creative act.
Yeah. We argue that wave function collapse is not the destruction of truth. Rather, it is an act of what the philosopher Hans-Georg Gadamer called horizon fusion.
Horizon fusion.
Yes, or what the sociologist Nicholas Luhmann called structural coupling.
I want to understand the mechanism there. How does horizon fusion actually work when I observe the world?
Well, when you interact with the universe, you are bringing your own context, your own history, and your own ethical needs to the table. You aren't just a passive camera recording data.
Right.
When we observe, we are building a temporary engineering structure between ourselves and the cosmos. We use our active knowledge to reach into that infinite imaginary sea, the holozon, and we deliberately pull one specific real number out of it.
We force it to be something useful.
Precisely. We do this to solve a practical ethical problem in our lives right then and there. Therefore, truth isn't some static dot sitting out in the void waiting to be found.
What is it then?
Truth is a rotating operator.
A rotating operator.
Yes.
Meaning it's an active mechanism shifting back and forth between the infinite potential of the invisible world and the practical application of the physical world.
You've got it.
You reach into the infinite invisible, and you pull out the exact physical reality you need to act ethically in the present moment. That is wild.
It completely changes how you view your daily life.
It really does.
Oh.
But I want to zoom out now, because we've seen this organic fusion at the microscopic quantum level. But what happens when we zoom out to the macroscopic scale? The scale of the entire cosmos.
The scale of astrophysics.
Yeah, astrophysics gives us this incredible mind-bending fact. All observable matter, every star, every planet, every galaxy we can see with all of our telescopes, you, me, the device the listener's using right now,
Yeah.
it all makes up only 5% of the universe.
It's staggering.
The other 95% is made up of dark matter and dark energy.
The 5% and the 95%, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it is perhaps the most profound physical proof of our philosophical framework.
So to go back to my intro, the 5% visible universe is the one single apple I'm holding in my hand. That's the real axis, the X in the math.
Yes, exactly. The visible universe is the physical projection. And that massive, invisible 95% dark sector represents the immense imaginary space.
Metaphysical reality.
Right, the metaphysical reality that we cannot directly observe, but which dictates absolutely everything that happens to the physical 5%. Let's break down how that mechanism works, starting with dark matter.
Which makes up roughly 27% of the universe.
Correct.
Because without dark matter, galaxies shouldn't exist, right?
Yeah.
Like if you look at how fast galaxies are spinning, it's like a merry-go-round spinning at supersonic speed.
Yes, everything should just fly off into the void.
It should tear itself apart.
That's a great way to visualize it. Pioneering astronomers like Vera Rubin and Fritz Zwicky noticed that if you only calculate the gravity of the visible 5% of a galaxy, there isn't nearly enough mass to hold it together.
So physics requires dark matter to fix this.
Exactly. This invisible, uninteracting substance that provides the gravitational glue. In our mathematical philosophy, we actually call this algebraic closure.
Algebraic closure. Like how you literally cannot solve certain polynomial math problems without inventing imaginary numbers to bridge the gap.
Yes. The observable real universe is fundamentally incomplete and broken on its own. It literally cannot hold itself together.
It needs the invisible.
It strictly requires the unobservable, imaginary dimension to bind it, to give it structure. Furthermore, if we look at theoretical physicist Eric Verlinde's hypothesis of entropic gravity, this gets even deeper.
Entropic gravity, what is the mechanism behind that?
Well, Verlinde suggests that gravity isn't actually a real fundamental force pulling things together. He says it's an illusion created by shifting information.
Wait, really? An illusion?
Yeah. Think about temperature. If you touch a hot stove, heat isn't a fundamental particle. It's an emergent feeling caused by atoms jiggling really fast.
Right.
In Verlinde's model, gravity is just the heat of invisible information shifting in the universe. The information in the imaginary dimension literally creates the physical pull in the real dimension.
Oh.
Information and meaning always precede physical matter.
The invisible meaning is the gravity holding the visible stars together.
Yes.
But dark matter is only part of that invisible 95%. The biggest chunk of the universe, roughly 68%, is dark energy.
That's right.
Now, dark matter pulls things together. But dark energy pushes things apart, right? Accelerating the expansion of the universe.
It does.
Why does an invisible metaphysical space require the universe to expand?
Well, Einstein initially hinted at this expansion with his cosmological constant, and modern thinkers like Roger Penrose with his conformal cyclic cosmology suggest this energy drives the universe through endless cycles of birth and rebirth.
Okay.
In our text, we actually frame dark energy as the metaphysical agency, or the ultimate will of the universe.
But why does it push outward?
Because the imaginary space contains infinite possibilities. If the universe remains static, those infinite possibilities could never be realized.
Oh, I see.
Dark energy is the active, driving force residing in the imaginary dimension. It's constantly injecting dynamic expansion, vitality, and forward momentum into our reality.
Giving it room to grow.
Exactly. It provides an ever-expanding physical canvas so that new realities, new ethical choices, and new human awakenings have the physical room to manifest. It ensures the universe doesn't just collapse into a stagnant, boring point.
Wow. So we've built this massive framework today.
We really have.
We've gone from the math of complex numbers to the lack of a pre-written script in quantum entanglement to wave function collapse, all the way up to dark matter holding galaxies together.
And dark energy expanding it all.
Yeah, to make room for infinite potential. So what does this all mean? I mean, you didn't just invent this completely out of nowhere. I'd love for you to trace the intellectual lineage of this complex space-time theory.
Oh, we are definitely standing on the shoulders of giants here. This synthesis has a very rich history. The mathematical foundation really begins in 1908 with Hermann Minkowski.
Okay.
He was the first to introduce the concept of imaginary time into physics, often written as
imaginary time.
Yeah, he showed that time mathematically behaves like an imaginary spatial dimension, which actually completed Einstein's theory of relativity.
Incredible.
Then, moving forward to the 1960s, Roger Penrose developed what is called twistor theory.
Okay, twistor theory sounds like a 1990s disaster movie, but I assume it's a bit more profound than that.
Very much so. Penrose suggested that the physical space we experience, up, down, left, right, isn't the fundamental bottom layer of reality.
It's not.
No, he argued that the true foundation of reality is actually a complex space. The physical world is just an emergent property, a shadow, an illusion of that deeper complex geometry.
That sounds exactly like what you were talking about earlier.
Exactly. Around the same time, physicist Ted Newman used complex coordinate transformations to solve incredibly difficult problems in general relativity.
Proving that the math needs the imaginary dimension.
Proving over and over that adding that imaginary dimension makes the math of the universe work perfectly.
And how does that pure math bridge into the modern era? Specifically the spiritual or philosophical side of things that you focus on.
Well, that brings us to the modern work of researchers like Sai-Chen Lee. He has integrated these concepts to propose an information field.
An information field.
A spiritual or imaginary space that is organically fusing with the physical real space. In our text, we synthesize these physical theories with deep philosophical traditions.
Which philosophers are we talking about here?
We draw heavily on Carlo Rovelli's concept of relational reality, which states that things only exist in relation to one another, much like our entangled complex space.
Right.
We utilize Niklas Luhmann's theories of how systems use meaning to reduce complexity. And perhaps most importantly, we look back to the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche.
Nietzsche. Wait, how does the 19th century philosopher who famously declared God is dead fit into complex math and dark matter?
It centers on his critique of what he called the cold moon.
The cold moon.
Yeah. Nietzsche heavily criticized objective, purely materialistic science. He saw purely objective science as a cold moon that merely reflects dead light. It has no heat of its own.
Okay.
He argued that we need the sun, the creative, driving, passionate force of human will and imagination.
So pure science without philosophy is basically just dead rock.
Exactly. In our framework, pure objective science is the real axis, the 5% of the universe.
The dead light.
Right. But without the imaginary axis, the 95% sun, the metaphysical, the creative, the invisible human will, the universe is just a cold, dead projection. The math needs the meaning.
Man, this entire journey has been absolutely mind-bending.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. We basically dismantled the idea that reality is just the stuff you can bump into. The physical world, our daily actions, the 5% of the cosmos we can see. It is all permanently glued to this vast, invisible, vibrating ocean of potential and meaning.
It truly is.
And to you, the listener, whether you're driving or cooking or just sitting on your couch trying to process all this math, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own.
Go for it.
If the universe is mathematically driven by an invisible 95% imaginary realm of infinite potential, and if the simple everyday act of observation collapses that infinite potential into our real ethical lives, could human civilization itself, our cultures, our ethics, our daily pursuit of goodness, be viewed as a massive cosmic quantum computer?
Wow.
Are we, you and me and everyone listening, the actual mechanism that the universe uses to calculate and materialize its own metaphysical dreams?
That is a beautiful way to think about it.
Thank you for listening. We hope this text has been helpful and inspiring to you. See you next time.